Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to this week's show. Today I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite herbs. It's Calamus, also known as sweetblack. Calamus is a fairly easy herb to identify once you know what you're looking for. It will grow in a marshy area, usually maybe around the side of a pond or a creek. It'll be with the cattails. And it grows up kind of like a reedy type plant, but it's got this little flower that's very unique. It's like a little yellow horn that pokes out of the side. And when you see that, you know you've got calamus. I will, of course, put a picture of calamus to go along with this week's podcast so you can see it. This plant has a fascinating history of use. It is one of the oldest herbs known to man. It was very popular in ancient Egypt. You can imagine with the Nile and all the flooding that they had, reeds, of course. We know that from, the basket Moses was hidden in. Cattails, which are a wonderful edible plant. You can eat the entire cattail, by the way. It just depends on what season of the year it is and what use you want out of it. Now, my favorite part of the cattail is really what's coming up right now in the spring. I like the inner part of the shoot as the cattail emerges out of the marsh. You take that and you peel it back, and you can pickle them like cucumbers. You eat them fresh. They taste a little cucumbery, and they pickle easily. And I love to make a good fermented pickle out of cattail shoots. And again, what I mean by that is just the stem of the plant, essentially, is it's up no more than 6 inches to a foot tall. Cut it off and peel it back, and it'll send another one right up out of that root. So it really doesn't do the plant any harm. The roots of the cattails are actually tubers. They can be eaten somewhat like Jerusalem artichokes or potatoes. Really, the whole plant's useful. The leaves, when they're young and tender, can be eaten. Pods can actually be made into a flower when they get mature. Really, just a great plant for survival purposes. Because, like I said, you can also weave baskets and make containers, and you can make fish traps out of cattails, out of the stalks and the leaves. You take them and you let them dry, and they get real tough, and you can then weave those into a basket type shape, long, cylindrical. It doesn't have to be that long. I mean, you can get by with one about 2 feet long, but I've seen people make them, oh, 5 to 10 feet long, and big ones, and as wide as maybe 3 feet across sometimes. You have it open on both ends, right? And on one end, you basically weave a screen. So the water flows through, the fish can see through it, but the fish can't get out that end. And the other end, you take your whatever material you're using, was cattails or reeds or even calamus fronds. I mean, the leaves from them, or willow. Willow is very popular. People on the rivers, especially in the eastern part of North Carolina, used to make fish traps out of willow. Sometimes the remains of one will be found that's more than 100 years old, probably a lot older than that. Actually, down in the Waccamaw system, there's a whole area called Bladen Lakes, which a few million years ago, a meteorite shower hit and formed all these lakes. And through there, you also have a bunch of rivers. You have the Waccamaw River, you have the Lumber River, you have the Black River, and it's all part of the Cape Fear system. Cape Fear is this huge river. Anyway, my grandfather was a park ranger for the time, and he spent a lot of time on the rivers around the lakes, and he found a couple of pre-Columbian canoes, old dugout canoes. I think they're both in the North Carolina Museum of Natural History now. But stuff like that turns up every now and then. It's just fascinating insight into these pre-Columbian cultures. My great grandfather, every time he plowed the field, he used to turn up arrowheads. He had a huge arrowhead collection. Anyway, Calamus. Well, let me finish that fish trap. On the other side, not the side that's like a screen they can't get through, but the open side they're going to swim into, you make a funnel type shape. You weave those things around, and it's a funnel that is wide enough for a fish to push its way through, but not turn around and get back out. Too hard to do, really. And then you just kind of attach everything together with some cattail leaves. You can just weave those together like cord. Yucca. Yucca actually makes fantastic cordage. So does kudzu and lots of stuff. Kudzu isn't native to the area, but it sure is naturalized. And you put that trap in the water with the funnel end, the mouth of the trap, as they call it, facing downstream, and the other end facing upstream. The fish always like to swim upstream when possible. They will flee downstream, but as they're searching for food, they face upstream and try to catch anything coming down the river. And you put a bait in that trap. It can be anything from a fish head that you caught, just anything. Dough balls work, cheese baits for catfish and such. Whether it's meat or fish, it's going to be a fish. Go in there, check it out, and see what it is. And you just secure that trap down in the water, tie it off real well, or you can, depending on what kind of stream you're in, maybe you can secure it with some rocks, but it's usually just kind of tied in and settled in, weighted down. And the next day you come out, pick up that trap and see if you got any fish in it. It's not always legal. It's very illegal in many places, but that's the way, our ancestors relied on those traps. They moved from the traps they would use to catch fish that way and turtle traps, which are somewhat similar, they're boxy, but anyway, to running trot lines. And and nets, trot lines and nets. Really for the shad fishing, they use the nets, and for the catfish, they use the trot lines. And that's how, a lot of this country was settled. But the calamus is such an interesting plant because its root has so many medicinal purposes. It was mentioned, I mean, this goes back, like I said, to the Egyptians. It was mentioned in the Ebers Papyrus, which is maybe 1500 BC, and the Chester Beatty Papyrus, which is another archaeological find, which I believe is 1600 BC. So, again, this is one of the oldest medicinal herbs known to man. It certainly goes back to ancient Babylon and well beyond anywhere you could find these reedy plants growing. Pliny the Elder wrote of Calamus in ancient Greece. Dioscorides, well, Theophrastus wrote about it in 633. Celsus in 136. I mean, it was just such a very commonly used medicinal herb at the time, and it's a bitter herb. It's a good digestive bitter. It's very good for, well, enhancing digestion, spurring digestion, soothing an upset stomach, settling especially intestinal spasms. It has some antispasmodic properties on the intestines. And Dioscorides wrote in De Materia Medica, he used it as a diuretic. He said it induces the movement of urine. He said it was good for dropsy, defective kidneys, painful urination, hernias. And so, through the ancient Greek and Roman world, calamus was certainly one of the most popular herbs, I mean, all kinds of uses. That, of course, translates into German folk medicine. As the Benedictines founded in Rome and began putting their monasteries throughout Central Europe and eventually moving into Western Europe, everywhere they went, mandated by law, by the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne, they had a herb garden and they were an apothecary. They offered free medical care to anyone in the community, and that was one of the main ways that Christianity spread through pre-Christian Europe was through their hospitals that were free and their schools that were free and all their charitable works. Whenever that monastery went in, it became the source of stability and really prosperity and civilization through the whole area, so that all these warring, Germanic tribes and such eventually became encompassed under the Holy Roman Empire, and then, later on became their own nation states as opposed to just warlords and tribes. So Calamus is one that they would gather from the wild, unless maybe they had a creek running through the monastery, I don't know, or a little pond. They would keep it in the officina. When we look at these herbs that end in officinalis, we know that's an herb that's officially from their medical pharmacy, their dispensatory, the officina. Well, Calamus does not have the officinale at the end, which indicates that even though it was widely used, it wasn't one grown, it was one that was wild harvested. Really interesting mention of this plant in a book about Polish herbal medicine. It's by Sophie Hodorowicz-Nab. She says that Calamus grows wild throughout Poland, and its use in herbal medicine was brought to Europe in the 16th century from Asia. A vodka called Ajwałka, I guess. I don't pronounce Polish very well. Or Kalmsuaka. That kind of sounds like calamus, and she said it was made from sweet flag calamus. The herb was used to decorate altars and houses, and it was a strewing herb in churches for Catholic feast days. She traces the herb arriving in Poland from Asia in the 16th, which is very interesting. You see, in that area of, say, Poland to Ukraine and Russia, they had not only the influence of the monastic medicine coming out of Rome, Tartars had a tradition of herbal medicine that we would now trace to basically traditional Chinese medicine. And so Calamus came into Central Europe from two directions, essentially, from the monasteries and from, centuries of interaction with the Tartars. Of course, that's a, fascinating history in and of itself. I mean, when you start getting into like Hungarian and Polish history, I mean, they had some really fierce armies, and like, Vlad the Impaler in Romania. These were some pretty tough bad dudes. They repelled invasions from Asia, from the Middle East, prevented Islam from taking over Christendom at different points, and as the nation states broke apart, they fought with themselves for a few hundred years. You can look at the Balkans. They've literally been at war for hundreds of years. So they needed their herbal medicine. And when they found something useful, they made good use of it. Mildly, Poland still has probably the strongest herbal tradition in the entire Western world, along with Germany, where it's one of the few places it was actually codified as being legal, thanks to the priests like Father Nape and Father Kunzel, Brother Aloysius. They made sure that herbal medicine could be continued to be practiced in Germany and the Germanic speaking countries like Switzerland and such, even in opposition to the modern medicine trying to make herbal medicine illegal, as they essentially did in, France, England, and America for a time. There was a time when it was very highly prosecuted, and that kind of eased off. Interestingly, in America, one of the main reasons that the FDA backed off and allowed people to kind of get back into herbal medicine and vitamin supplements and all that was, I believe it was Orrin Hatch. He's Mormon, and the Mormons had this tradition of herbalism, and he got in there into the Senate and applied a whole lot of political pressure to get the agencies to back off. I mean, even in the, I guess, mid 90s, um, you'd hear about a co-op or a health food store being raided by the FDA. I mean, like a SWAT team coming in with guns drawn, ripping the ginseng and vitamin C off the shelf because, by law, that was not necessarily allowed. I mean, it depended on the labeling you had on the product and how it was being marketed and all that. But all that kind of ended, or at least they backed off a little bit by the late 1990s due to the political influence of the Mormons. So, Calamus also used a lot in Mormon herbal medicine, by the way. But speaking of Brother Aloysius, he was Father Nape's protege. He used calamus for nervous fevers, especially accompanied by dysentery. Also used for abdominal pain, mucus of the stomach, intermittent fevers, weakness of the stomach and intestines, mucic acid, hypochondria, hysterical complaints, phlegm in the chest, leukorrhea, scurvy, swollen spleen, and to promote menstruation. So you can see that, by the 1800s, Calamus had found use for very many things. Calamus is also included in the Swedish bitters. It was a favorite herb of um, Paracelsus, Theophrastus, Bombastus von Hohenheim, the great herbalist, physician, and alchemist, real legendary character there himself. Gerard, in the English tradition, this would be around 15, mid 1500s. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare, so it's got that Elizabethan English to it. I try not to always pronounce it exactly the way he wrote it because it gets a little confusing and I get my tongue tied. But he mentioned how Dioscorides has said the roots had a healing faculty, and Galen and Pliny um, used them in their herbal medicine, saying they were hot and dry. That's part of the old energetic system, the humor system of Greece. But he said decoction of the root of calamus provokes urine, helps pain in the side, liver, spleen, and breast, convulsions, gripings, and burstings. It easeth the pain and helpeth the pissing by drops. In other words, it was a diuretic, and yes, that slightly vulgar term in our uh, era was quite properly used as good English in Victorian, I mean in Elizabethan times. He said it is of great effect being put in a broth or taken in the fumes to provoke women's natural courses, provokes menstruation. Juice strained with a little honey takes away the dimness of the eyes, helps against poison, the hardness of the spleen, and all infirmities of the blood. I forgot to mention, calamus was often included in poison remedies, and like mithridate and the various poison remedies of the ancient world. He said the root boiled in wine, stamped and applied as a plaster. That means kind of using it as a poultice. Reduces swelling and helps with all hardness, like a hard swelling. He recommended taking a quantity of the root and boiling it in muscatel wine, so a sweet wine, to help with people that are bruised from bad beatings or falls. It's often been used as a wound herb, as often infused in wine, exactly the way he said. And he mentions again that the root is used with good success in counter poisons. In his age, it was still being used in those formulas for curing poisons that are really the ancestors of our modern bitters formula. And interestingly enough, they had by this time in England learned how to candy the root, make actual candies of the roots, which were common in Turkey. Turks at Constantinople take it fasting in the morning against the contagion of corrupt air. That means they thought it would help prevent the plague, essentially, contagious disease. Now, Miss Grieve in A Modern Herbal talked about calamus at length. She spent several pages on calamus, and I won't get into all of that. But she did mention that even in the 1930s, she said until quite recently, the floors of Norwich Cathedral were strewn with this herb of calamus at great festivals. So we see that this herb was used in a religious context, both in Poland, coming from at least the 16th century, and in England at that time. I think we can assume that in all Catholic, and of course by this time in England it would be Anglican churches, had this tradition of strewing certain herbs on the floor during festivals, during special holy days. You know, for most of our human history, bathing in soaps and perfume were not common. People were kind of smelly, and people were traveling by horse if they had any means of traveling at all, or an oxen or some other animal. There would be a lot of manure all over the place. And of course, there wasn't anything such as indoor plumbing, so you actually had open sewers and such in cities. And the cities were really pretty stinky and unhealthy, which is why in most countries, just about all countries, people would go to the countryside whenever they could to breathe fresh air and drink clean water and all that. That's where we get our whole tradition of health spas and everything. In those churches on those holy days, they would take those plants and they would strew them on the floor and they would burn incense of frankincense and myrrh, just as mentioned in the Bible. That's actually, if you walk into a Catholic church in Mass or what we call a high Anglican church, they'll burn an incense. That's that scent. It's a wonderful smell. But of course, fresh plants, flowers, even the roots of calamus would not have been in great supply or long-term storage as much as incense made from the resins of trees. So for special days, for holy days, they would take certain flowers often associated with a saint or an angel or another religious significance, and they would have an altar covered with them. They would decorate the church with the flowers. That's still a tradition in most Protestant churches today. It's decorating the church with flowers, especially around Christmas and Easter. All comes from a tradition where basically, and I think this is very much part of human nature, you know, presenting someone as with flowers as a gift, a sign of appreciation. I mean, of course in our tradition it's a romantic custom to give flowers to someone you love, to a woman. That really goes back to ancient man. I mean, if you think about it, you don't own the flower. You did nothing to create the flower. God grows the flowers, right? So you go out into nature and gather these flowers and then bring them into the church to present as an offering to God. It's a very natural tradition, a very natural connection that I think is very part of the nature of man, our appreciation for the beauty of nature and then giving thanks for it. If you think about the human eye, we see spectrums of colors, we see things that most animals and do not. Birds see things very different, like often in bright neon colors. They're insects that may see more colors than we do, or just one or two main parts of the color spectrum. We actually have the ability to appreciate the beauty of nature more than any other creature. When the Bible says man is the crown of creation, and that's part of that entire concept that we can actually appreciate the beauty of nature and give thanks to for it, whereas the other animals, the lower creatures as they're called, one, don't have the consciousness to appreciate beauty, and two, don't have the eyes. They have better senses of smell, they have better senses of hearing, but they don't have the rods and cones the way we have. It's an interesting concept, and I think it's very nice that even in most like rural, let's say a Southern Baptist church, like I was grew up a lot in when I was a child, still has that tradition of bringing in flowers on Christmas and at Easter, and flowers for funerals and all that. You know, most of them wouldn't even admit they got that tradition from the Catholic Church, and of course the Catholic Church openly admits that that tradition goes back to pre-Christian forms of worship. So I think it's when you plant a flower garden, when you walk in the woods, you really do have a sense of peace. You really do feel like you're communing with a higher power, and I think that's just it's a universal quality of people of all religions in all times and places. And I think if you lose that appreciation for nature, that appreciation for beauty, I think you lose a big part of your humanity. When we think about the Soviet Union and the Cold War, or the communist side of Germany, various places like the horrible, war-torn places in Syria, the beauty is one of the first things that gets wiped out. Everything gets cold and gray and brown and burned and black. And the first signs of life are when the flowers start coming back in and the beauty of nature, and people react to that and they become happier and more peaceful and interacting more peacefully with their fellow man. That's why art and music and like I said, the beauty of nature, flowers and all that are such an essential part of humanity. They're such an essential part of who we are. And well, anyway, I'm wandering far afield. Let me get back to a chorus calamus. I do have a tendency to go off on tangents. And Miss Grieve also mentioned that the Tartars brought Calamus into Poland in around 1588. But I doubt the Tartars infused it in vodka. That would have been a very Polish thing. But that's how the Poles like to use it. It had been used, of course, in a much more widespread way throughout the Roman Empire before that time, and long before then, as I've mentioned. She said it grew very commonly in England around ponds and rivers, though it was scarce in Scotland and was found in all European countries growing wild except Spain, and was actually at this time being cultivated in Hungary. Now, her list of its medicinal actions, she says calamus was formerly much esteemed as an aromatic stimulant and a mild tonic. At this point, 1931, it was still part of the official pharmacy in the United States. She said it was good for discomfort caused by flatulence, intestinal cramping, stimulated the appetite, benefited digestion, good for dyspepsia, which is, heartburn and indigestion, and was also good for low fevers, fevers that weren't too high, and actually was successful in treating malarial fevers even when Peruvian bark, which was quinine, wasn't effective anymore. And going back to an even older British herbal, this was Waller's British Herbal, said it was of great service for all nervous complaints, vertigos, headaches, and hypochondrial conditions, dysentery, chronic catarrh, which is congestion, and he recommended infusing the calamus root in white wine and taking a sip of it every now and then. She recommends again, or she mentions again, the Turks using it as a candy form against contagion. So again, it was thought to prevent the spread of infection. And she said the candy was very popular in Lithuania. See, in the North American tradition, calamus was much used by Native Americans. Tismau Crow, who wrote about the Muskogee tradition, said the calamus was used for throat and voice problems, laryngitis, toothaches, teething pain, arthritis, combined with cedar to make an expectorant cough syrup. The Cherokees used calamus either chewed or in tea for colds, headaches, and sore throats. And the Lumbee Indians, the tribe closest to me as I was growing up, and with which I've been very much involved, used calamus as a stimulant and somatic for colic, worms, yellowish urine, and dropsy, which is edema, as a diaphoretic for colds, headaches, stomach ache, upset stomach, sore throat, and combined it with other herbs as a heart remedy for infections and for heartburn. And they actually mention in the Lumbee, in Herbal Remedies of the Lumbee Indian, that the Abenaki tribe used calamus for stomach discomfort, and the Algonquin tribes would use the plant for a cold remedy. So you can see that calamus was very much used, on at least two continents, well, three actually, if you include Asia. And in the Native American tradition, it was being used for the same conditions. See, that's what we call empirical data. Most of our herbs have yet to be studied in a laboratory setting to prove what they do and what they don't do. But we go through the centuries. This is what I like to do in different countries, finding similar uses for the same plant. And that is as good a proof to me of what the plant does as anything. Also go by personal experience. Calamus is one of my favorite plants to use. I've been using calamus. I started using it when I was um, still in high school. And the interesting reason for that, calamus has a quality of enhancing concentration and physical endurance. If you take the root and chew it, or you take a tincture of it, it helps you concentrate, pay attention, recall things better. So I would take it when studying or before a test. I would chew some up, but I also used it on long hikes. I used to hike 10 miles a day easily. And calamus has been used since ancient Rome, at least, by the soldiers as they were on their long marches. They would chew the calamus root, and it would give them more endurance. Time seemed to pass more quickly, and they stayed more sharp-minded and didn't get weary. They didn't get mentally tired or as physically tired. So I found that in a book probably when I was 15. Got some calamus and kept some around and chewed it whenever I needed it, and found it to be really one of my favorite herbs. It's a good lung herb for congestion and such as well. Anytime I have upset stomach, I grab some calamus and chew it. It has a very peppery, bitter taste that takes some getting used to. And there's a really good book called The Drunken Botanist by Amy Stewart. She talks about all the different herbs and flowers and such that have been used in um, wines and liquors and such for flavoring and for their medicinal properties. She researches several centuries just like I do. She said the rhizome of the calamus has a complex, spicy, bitter flavor that lends itself to amaros like Campari and herbal liqueurs like chartreuse, as well as gin and vermouth. The flavor has been described as woodsy, leathery, and also creamy. Now, that's interesting. I would not have thought creamy, but I can definitely get woodsy and leathery, definitely peppery. It actually feels warm on the tongue like cinnamon. But she points out something that's very important. European calamus, the one we've been talking about mostly, may be slightly carcinogenic. The FDA has banned it as a food additive. She states, however, not all sweet flag is equally dangerous. The American variety called A. calamus, variety americanus, Acorus calamus, variety americanus, does not have any significant amount of the potential toxin, and European strains have only relatively low levels. And she says that the European Union still allows calamus to be widely used in bitters, vermouths, and liqueurs. So, if there is any toxicity or carcinogenic effect, potential, I should say, um, it's not found, at least in any significant quantity, in the American calamus. I always use the American calamus. And actually, in the most commonly used variety in Europe, it's in very low levels. So it seems like once again our FDA has overreacted. They won't let us use sassafras anymore. They don't want you to use comfrey internally anymore, even though comfrey's been used internally for centuries, thousands of years. And now they also don't want us to use at least the European variety of calamus. But I think they have banned calamus completely as a food additive in North America, even the harmless American variety. So once again, they've overreacted. And if you're going to use calamus, you're going to have to learn how to use it yourself. And one of the best ways to use it is in bitters. DIY Bitters by Guido Massi and Jovial King describes calamus as a cosmopolitan reed. An interesting way of putting it. It says it has two major varietals. One grows in India and naturalizes into Asia and Europe, and the other is native in North America. The North American species is deemed safer, but both have a long history of use and are favored for their unique, spicy pungency. In the Old World, calamus was used in incense blends from Egypt to Solomon's temple. In the New World, pieces of the rhizome were chewed to relieve fatigue and to lighten the spirit. So once again, empirical evidence showing up in different places at different times and different peoples that did not communicate with each other. I find these are threads I love to investigate. I mean, when I get started on an herb and I'm researching its use and its history, I almost feel like a detective or an archaeologist, going through these books. I love this stuff. The National Center for Biotechnology Information states Acorus calamus, sweet flag, has a long history of use and has numerous traditional and ethnomedicinal applications. Ancient times, it has been used in various systems of medicine, such as Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, Chinese medicine, etc., for the treatment of various ailments like nervous disorders, appetite loss, bronchitis, chest pains, colic, cramps, diarrhea, digestive disorders, flatulence, gas, indigestion, rheumatism, as a sedative, for coughs, fevers, bronchitis, inflammation, depression, tumors, hemorrhoids, skin diseases, numbness, general debility, and vascular disorders. That's a lot. Okay, that makes calamus one of our most powerful medicinal herbs. Various therapeutic potentials of this plant have been attributed to its rhizome. Then they get into all kinds of chemical stuff that we don't need to talk about right now. You're welcome to find this in my book, The Encyclopedia of Bitter Medicinal Herbs, if you want all the chemical information. They also point out that various pharmacological activities of the rhizome, such as being a sedative, CNS depressant, anticonvulsant, antispasmodic, cardiovascular, hypolipidemic, immunosuppressive, anti-inflammatory, cryoprotective, antioxidant, antidiarrheal, antimicrobial, anti-cancer, and anti-diabetic have been reported. Wow, it has, like I said, just a ton of uses, but one of the most interesting that I really have to warn you about is that in all the cultures where calamus has been used, it has also been used for its drug-like effect. Essentially, if you ate enough of the calamus root, and it's supposed to be fresh, it has a excitant and psychedelic effect. You begin to hallucinate, and it causes a great deal of agitation. Now, in some traditions, this was used exactly for that purpose, as a magical herb for visions and all that. Um, that documentation is nowhere near as good or as thorough as its medicinal documentation. There are certain books and websites where you can look things up like that, and I went to one of them, and I found the following entry. It says sweet flag, Acorus calamus, also called sweet calomel, not caramel obviously, calomel, grows in damp places in the north and south temperate regions, a member of the arum family. It is one of two species. It says there is some indirect evidence that Indians of northern Canada who employ the plant as a medicine and stimulant may chew the rootstock as a hallucinogen. In excessive doses, it is known to induce strong visual hallucinations. The intoxicating properties may be due to oh, more chemicals that we don't need to get into, but the chemistry and pharmacology of the plant are still poorly understood. Now, that's very important to remember. You really definitely do not want to go out and get a bunch of calamus and try to use it this way, because the guy that was researching this decided to try it, and he described it as one of the most terrifying, hellish experiences he had ever had. This is someone who uses a lot of, psychedelics and such. This one scared the crap out of him, and apparently was very hard on the body, very unpleasant. We're talking rapid heart rate. We're talking, aches and chills and pains and an extreme sense of fear. So don't misuse calamus. You're probably going to really regret it if you do. And it's true of, you know, several herbs that have medicinal qualities, like datura, for instance, Jimson weed. Jimson weed, the leaf dried, included in smoking mixtures for asthma, used as an antispasmodic for nerve pain for centuries, right? But every year, I mean, especially up here in the mountains, kids go out thinking they're going to trip on Jimson weed and they die. They either end up in a mental institution, in the hospital, barely surviving the experience, or dead. So I always warn people, don't do stuff like that. It's not worth it. I mean, especially in this day and time, if you've got to try to do something like that, there's so many legal and safer alternatives. Don't use dangerous herbs unless you know about them. Now, like I said, I chew a few pieces of the root for medicinal value. It is dried and it has no drug-like effect. That's how I use it. I also use it in bitters and as a tincture and as a tea. Interestingly, as a tea, Maria Trevin was really, really fond of calamus. It was one of her go-to herbs. She used it as a tea. She'd make 1 cup of tea and recommend people take about a sip or two of it an hour throughout the day. She actually attributed to healing, I think it was her mother's stomach cancer. I mean, she really thought this was one of the most effective herbs. She used it for all kinds of really serious bowel complaints, stomach complaints, tuberculosis of the intestines, which was still not uncommon in Germany in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, for a 36-year-old man who had not been able to regain his strength after a tumor on the liver had been removed, he had attacks of high fever due to tuberculosis of the intestine. That's a very sick guy, okay? Says his mother-in-law told me this hopeless illness. Here too, calamus has helped. It is understandable in such cases that the tea had to be drunk for weeks, if not months. She goes on, she tells story after story after story of people she helped with calamus tea or by chewing calamus, people who are wasting away, just general debility, as the old herbalists used to say it, that the calamus increased their appetite, it helped them regain strength. She has just story after story of people who are like near death, especially from digestive issues and liver issues and such, that took her calamus tea remedy. She was very famous. She went around and spoke at schools and churches and anywhere that would have her throughout much of Europe and a little bit in the United States in later years. And I mean, she swore by Calamus, and so did all kinds of people who wrote in letters telling them. She said an elderly priest who had suffered from diarrhea for years and had resigned himself to the situation, following my advice, began to take 6 sips of calamus root tea daily. In a short time, he was back to normal. A man suffering from bloody diarrhea for 10 years was almost dead. He followed the same remedy and he became better. So again, that's Maria Treben's Help from God's Pharmacy or Help Through God's Garden. She wrote a couple books with similar titles. And if you want to read a whole lot about calamus, be sure to read that. And she also discusses in great length, phenomenally great length, the Swedish bitters, the great Swedish bitters and the small Swedish bitters, of which calamus is an essential ingredient. And in modern times, I'll just see what Plants for a Future says about calamus. They say the use of sweet flag has a very long history of medicinal use in many herbal traditions. It's widely employed in modern herbal medicine as an aromatic stimulant and a mild tonic. And Ayurveda is highly valued as as a rejuvenator for the brain and nervous system and as a remedy for digestive disorders. They again warn about the toxicity, perhaps of the European variety, that it could potentially be carcinogenic, and they say the root is anodyne, aphrodisiac, aromatic, carminative, diaphoretic, emmenagogue, expectorant, febrifuge, hallucinogenic, hypotensive, sedative, and stimulant, stomatic, mildly tonic, and vermifuge. That's a big list of uses for one little plant that grows among the cattails. And again, how you use it is going to depend on the effects of it. They say it is used internally for the treatment of digestive complaints, bronchitis, sinusitis, etc. It is said to have wonderfully tonic powers of stimulating and normalizing the appetite. In small doses, it reduces stomach acidity, while in large doses, it increases stomach secretions and is therefore recommended in the treatment of anorexia nervosa. However, if the dose is too large, it will cause nausea and vomiting. That was, the guy that had such a bad experience with it. That was another thing he experienced, nausea and vomiting. Sweet flag is also used externally to treat skin eruptions, rheumatic pains, and neuralgia. And if fusion of the root can cause a miscarriage, so once again, don't ever use most herbs, almost any herbs, while pregnant. Says the chewing of the root can alleviate toothache. That's very true. When you chew the root, it numbs the mouth wherever it's touching. It is a great folk remedy for arthritis, cancer, convulsions, diarrhea, dyspepsia, and epilepsy. Remember, it has an antispasmodic property. Antispasmodic herbs have long been used to help with epilepsy. Chewing the root is said to kill the taste for tobacco. Now, I have not found that to be the case. Chewing the root, yes. But calamus is often included in herbal smoking blends. So it's not merely the use of calamus that kills the taste for tobacco, but it's that peppery, numbing quality in the mouth. You just really would not want to mix the two together. Roots 2 to 3 years old are used. Older roots tend to become tough and hollow. And they say hazards of calamus, they say the fresh root can be poisonous. That may be yet another reason why that guy took it as a hallucinogen and had such a horrible time. Like I said, I only have experience with the dried root, and apparently the dried root is not used in that. So that's wrapping up calamus for the day. I think you'll find this to be a fascinating herb. It grows just about anywhere in North America that you can find water. It's you're going to find it among the cattails and the reeds. It has what, a million uses. I mean, it's absolutely one of the most interesting and useful herbs. And I really didn't even get into its use as an incense, which apparently is how it was used in Solomon's temple and somewhat in ancient Egypt. They also entombed Calamus along with their mummies and such. I mean, it's such an interesting herb, such an interesting history. And again, I really do think the FDA is overstating the dangers, but you're going to have to make that decision on your own. Remember, I'm not giving you medical advice. If you've had cancer, if you have cancer now, maybe don't use it. Maybe don't use comfrey or sassafras or anything else like that as well, right? If you have a family history of cancer, look into it and decide if you think it's safe or not. I'm not making any recommendation. I use it. Calamus could certainly be what they call, the straw that broke the camel's back. Some people, if some people are being exposed to a lot of carcinogens or they have a strong proclivity, inherited um, cancer potential, yeah, I certainly would take that under advisement and be very careful. Always do your research and trust your own judgment, and don't use any herb just because somebody wrote about it and said it worked for this. First of all, make sure it's going to work for you. And as I always said, I ain't dead yet, and I use it. So, y'all have a great week. I'll see you next time. Please don't forget, I got a new book out there. It's all about the medicinal properties of shrubs and woody vines. It's a really neat book. It's getting really great reviews. People are telling me all kinds of really great feedback. I mean, they're just surprised to find so many plants out in there that they never knew had medicinal use. They're growing in their yard already, and they're like, "Wow, I've got a medicine cabinet here in my yard, and I didn't even know about it." So I love writing books like that. I do them very much the same way with the empirical evidence, researching these herbs for over the centuries and over different cultures of use. And I think they're pretty unique in that way. So check out my books. I've written 7 so far. They're all available on Amazon in paperback, or you can get them from me as a PDF. Remember, if you have any questions, email me, southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com or judson@judsoncarroll.com. I look forward to seeing y'all again next week. Have a good one. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.